The armed forces of Ukraine are confidently holding their positions and destroying Russian occupiers on the approaches to Myrnohrad and in the urban areas of Pokrovsk, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The defense of the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration continues. The situation remains complex and dynamic. Here, the enemy is deploying all available reserves, but in return, is suffering enormous losses, General Staff stated. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky said on national television that Pokrovsk is now a heavily fortified area and that Ukrainian troops continue to hold their positions despite repeated Russian attempts to break through. There are a few places where the Russians managed to get through our defenses, but we know exactly where those are, Syrsky said. Of course, we have Plan B and Plan C for all possible situations. He said the situation remains under control and that logistics routes into the city have been restored. Logistics to the city remain difficult but ongoing. Information suggesting that Russian forces have full fire control over the logistical routes of the Ukrainian defense forces, or that the city is operationally encircled, is not true, he emphasized. Recently, the units defending the city received the necessary weapons and ammunition. In addition, rotation of personnel and evacuation of the wounded have been carried out. The same logistical support and rotation are maintained for our units in the city of Pokrovsk, he added. The General Staff stressed that active countermeasures continue against enemy infantry groups attempting to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk. Search and strike operations are ongoing in the city, and enemy positions in the urban area are being destroyed. The 425th Assault Regiment, deployed to Pokrovsk, is operating very effectively, Syrsky added. Russia has concentrated about 50,000 troops in the area and lost roughly 30,000 since October, according to the general. Syrsky said commanders assess the battlefield situation 3 times a day and he urged Ukrainians not to panic. Pokrovsk is a fortress, he said. The situation is difficult but stable. In this case Russia is redeploying mortar crews and drone operators to strengthen control over Ukrainian supply routes. A Ukrainian service member operating in this direction stated that weather conditions are complicating the use of Ukrainian drones both for reconnaissance and for striking Russian units. At the same time, he emphasized that the armed forces of Ukraine hold positions across the city, while Russian troops control only certain areas of Pokrovsk. Some Russian war correspondents have acknowledged that combat in the city is not intense, noting that Pokrovsk is not engulfed in flames, and that machine gun skirmishes occur rarely. ISW continues to assess that Russian forces will likely increase their tempo of ground activity in Pokrovsk in the coming days as they extend logistics and bring forward personnel into the town, the analysis notes.
$142,258 killed soldiers of the Russian occupation army. That's the number confirmed by independent researchers as of early November. In the past 2 weeks, nearly 5,000 new deaths have been added to the list, double the usual rate. These data were presented by Media Zona and the BBC Russian service. Researchers note that the increase is not due to a change in the situation at the front, but to clarification of data on those listed as missing. These figures are just the tip of the iceberg. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reports that the total losses of the Russian army, including killed and wounded, have already reached 1,100,000. 148,910. The discrepancy between the official and independent figures is easily explained. The Kremlin is concealing the scale of the disaster and doing everything possible to prevent Russians from knowing exactly how many of their fellow citizens have perished in Ukrainian fields. A particularly alarming trend in recent months is the involvement of minors. According to Russian journalists, more and more teenagers are volunteering for the front, often immediately after turning 18. Russian authorities have consistently rewritten laws to expand the scope for such recruitment. As a result, young men who have barely finished school are now being sent to war. Their paths are the same. From signing a contract to death, only 1 or 2 months pass. Young Russians, swayed by promises of easy money and glory, end up on the front lines and die under fire from Ukrainian drones and artillery. For the Kremlin, they are expendable, cheap bodies to replenish the assault squads. Russian propaganda calls them heroes, but in reality, they are children being thrown into the meat grinder by the authorities to continue their aggression. While Moscow promises victory at any cost, the price is being paid by Russians themselves, with their lives and the future of their children. The British Ministry of Defense says more than 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in wartime, a toll that is impossible to independently verify, given that Russia keeps these statistics secret, but is consistent with other estimates by Western intelligence agencies and think tanks. But according to Oleg Ignatov, senior Russian analyst at Crisis Group, one reason behind Russia's swelling number of troops is that it is now suffering fewer losses. This is explained by a change in tactics, he told. Russia has almost stopped using heavy equipment on the battlefield because it is highly vulnerable to drones. The last time Russia used heavy equipment on a large scale was during the Kursk operation in winter, he added, referring to Ukraine's counterattack in western Russia. Russia has not attacked with large groups of soldiers for a long time. Russia uses small groups, sometimes 1 or 2 people, to gradually infiltrate Ukrainian army positions under the cover of drones and artillery. This reduces casualties. In the first year of the war, thousands of young men eligible for military service fled towards neighboring countries such as Georgia and Mongolia. Police patrolled subways and raided accommodation housing migrants to round up potential draftees. These fears of being press-ganged have now largely dissipated. In reality, since November 1st, 2022, there is no call-up for mobilization, said a human rights lawyer from Appeal to Conscience, a collective that helps eligible recruits avoid military service. At the same time, the mobilization period is ongoing and has not been lifted. That is, those who are mobilized and already serving cannot quit until the end of mobilization. Since 2022, instead of conscripting for mobilization, the regions have been given the task of recruiting contract soldiers. Only those recruited under contract can participate in the war. The lawyer added that the confusion is exploited by unscrupulous recruiters who tell their targets that, since conscription is still in place, they are obliged to sign a contract. There have been cases where conscripts have had contracts signed on their behalf, which is illegal in Russia.